I did like this quote from you, though.
Oh dear.
Look to the last 4 years in the U.S. as a case study in what not to do. So do you think is buying Greenland off the table then not such a great idea?
Well, it was never a great idea because because A, it's silly. Because who buys anything other than like evil mad scientists to buy an island to put their doomsday base on and before they like ignite the atmosphere or something.
That's what I was thinking too.
It's very much something like that. It has all those feelings. The reality, sadly, is it sets up a really bad precedent. Because technically speaking, it really shouldn't be possible at this point in time to buy another country or chunks off another country. We sort of put that point in time behind us, not to say it couldn't come back. And doing this would encourage that to come back because it sets that awful thing precedent. Because once you do it once, everyone goes, well, they did it. Maybe we can do it.
But on a more serious note for the adults and the adults in the room, what actually did happen, and I got this from your core page again, the fewer environmental regulations. So the slashing of regulations, which include increased logging in Alaska, reduction of protection for Arctic species, and this one was interesting to me, the permitting of using dogs to hunt bears and wolves. What's up with that?
So Alaska, this is in many ways an Alaska thing, as much as it was a presidential administration thing. So this is one of those things where trophy bear hunting, and to a degree, food hunting of bears, because you can eat bear. I actually have a recipe for bear in my old joy of cooking that dates back to 1979.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But you can hunt bear, and that's actually allowed, and it's been allowed for a while. It's just very sustainable numbers. It's like literally you can take one or two, and that's about it. It's not a large population of people doing it for the sustainability side. But then there's the trophy hunting side, because apparently for some people, there's nothing better than shooting a bear and mounting it in your house. And that's my cat.
Your cat's present for animal talk.
My cat is totally present for animal talk.
Wait, what is crawling around in that aquarium behind you?
Oh, there's one turtle and 4 minnows in that aquarium. If we were still in class, if we were still in school when I was teaching your class, this probably would have been the classroom pet.
Oh, neat. Mascot.
Yeah, so our mascot, the red-eared slider.
The Ninja Turtle.
Not so ninja, but the hungry turtle.
What about hunting wolves too? Like, is that for sport as well, or like, are you?
Depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah,
and talking about. Well, it's one of those things where
the wolves might be hunting you.
Well, they can, though they tend not to. Wolves actually don't like humans very much and do their best to just stay away from us. It literally comes down to predator is no good at hunting traditional prey. Humans are kind of slow. You get that one by itself. It's not really able to defend itself unless it is, in which case it's dead. But otherwise, yeah, then maybe we'll take a bite there or 2 or 3 or,
like in The Gray with Liam Neeson. You ever see that one?
Yes. Well, it's like, what was it, Lions in the Darkness? No, Crud. There was a thing about, oh my God, it was a movie in the late 90s, early 2000s. I'm forgetting the name. That was about lions hunting railroad workers in Africa during like the
Is that The Ghost in the Darkness?
Yes. It was really fascinating because the end result was basically these 2 male lions that were not really in great shape that basically decided humans were weak and squishy and delicious. Whereas if you're a healthy lion, zebra's a much better choice, or at least the weak zebras are a better choice, and they do their best.
What does that say about us? We're like the McDonald's of the food pyramid.
Individually weak, collectively strong. That's what it says about us, because collectively we then basically exterminate buffalo. And oh God, have you seen a wolf in Pennsylvania in the last ever?
No, but I saw a fox run down my street like last week.
Awesome.
It was all I ran. I was like, did you see that fox? There's a fox. They're really cool. They're really neat.
Foxes up in the cemetery above me.
So then all right, so Biden becomes president. He joins the Paris Climate Agreement again. And then he turns around before we even get our stimulus checks and drops a bunch of bombs on Syria. So you mentioned greenwashing, and then you mentioned like the Paris Climate Agreement is something that governments can say, hey, we're trying to, solve this climate change thing, but there's really nobody to hold us accountable since we're in charge. Is in a way, when the government and governments do things like that, corporations who would just pollute and destroy the world with their enterprises and then turn around and like donate some money to say like, hey, we're doing this environmental thing, greenwashing. Is it in a way, do you see that the government is doing the same thing? And like, if somebody claims they care about the environment and then turns around and drops a bunch of bombs on the environment, does that sort of like cancel out any positives that they're doing in your mind, or how do you feel about that?
I am not absolutist enough to say X cancels out Y, and the whole thing has to be taken in a broad scheme. The strike against Syria, I am neutral about that. I am a foreign policy internationalist, so I prefer strong international unions versus, basically tit for tat or what can you do for me sort of stuff, though that always exists to some degree. So I can't say it doesn't happen and it will never happen, but this was a situation that, based on what happened, was actually proportional to what occurred. It was based on a missile strike that happened earlier. We returned the favor in a very limited, very targeted, incredibly collateral damage, as far as I can tell, non-existent counterblow versus the very famous and incredibly graphic knife missile attack on that Iranian commander about a year and a half to 2 years ago, where they basically took out one of the senior leaders of the Iranian Republican Guard, who happened to be running, to be fair, completely honest, insurgency operations in Iraq. Though that was seen as retaliation for a series of tanker bombings earlier. So that was something that was deliberately provocative. This was a situation where, at least what I can tell, and I'll be honest, I'm not omniscient or not omnipotent, to be in proportional response. The environmental side, it's not a huge one unless we're doing things like blowing the top off. Well, Saddam Hussein at the end of the first Gulf War, where he detonated the pumps off oil wells to basically have massive oil spills and huge oil fires in the region. The region's still showing some effects from that, even now, 30 years later. We're not doing things like mass utilization of neurotoxins or pesticides like Agent Orange to defoliate, nothing like that. So I consider the environmental aspect limited, if not much present at all, other than, fuel consumption. I don't consider that hypocritical in that context. I do consider it problematic in that it seems we're still operating on the authorization of use of military force left over from basically post-2001. And Congress should really step up and force the president to request a new use of force if they want to undertake actions like this. I know it's incredibly convenient to already have this thing so you can undertake actions like this, even on a limited basis, on your own call and merits, but it also can lead to abuse.
I guess in my mind, I'm just thinking if it's really such a pressing matter, why are we even wasting any time with war games and missiles and bombs and sending armies all around the world? It's like, we want to stay focused here, right?
I don't disagree, and I think it isn't entirely necessary. This gets to the bigger issue of what's the role of both the US, but also any major power in the world at this point in time. I mean, here's a question. What's the role of the United States Navy?
Do you want an answer from me?
If you wish, or I can answer it myself. I
don't know.
suddenly defaulted into teacher mode. I'm sorry.
Kill people.
Fair enough. And so defending the borders is one side, but the other side is to secure international trade.
Okay.
Because without the US Navy basically upholding international trade and make sure the ocean stays safe and stable, technically speaking, international trade could really suffer. And then think of everything that gets impacted because of that. How much of your food comes from overseas? How much of your electronics come from overseas? How much of the parts of your cars come from overseas?
It's like a global security guard for the business.
It's many ways is. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, this is what sort of develops out of the 1990s after the end of the Cold War. So when we look at this sort of stuff, it goes, okay, so what do we do that encourages that? What do we do that technically encourages that, but really is trying to maintain some sort of stability we accept versus stability we don't accept? And how much of this is really getting diverted into various and sundry things we're so far committed in, we're basically playing the sunk cost fallacy over and over and over again.
Because now this prediction or estimate that you shared in your Quora page, where the earlier thinking was that by 2100, I don't know how you say that year, 2100,
2100, that works.
There would be no more summer ice in the Arctic. But now that prediction has been changed to 2040, much earlier, 60 years earlier than ever thought. So you're saying, like, I don't know, days fly off the calendar anymore. I'm not going to be surprised when I look up and it's 2040 all of a sudden, and there's no more summer ice in the Arctic. So that's really approaching rapidly. And that, how big of a concern is that? Is it too late to prevent that from happening? Tell me about that.
To be completely honest, no joking, if this number is true and this date is close enough to reality, there's really nothing we can do about it. And this is a future we must prepare ourselves for. Now, I will say, this is not it's potentially the complete elimination of summer sea ice. There might still be a small well of it in far northern Canada, because the close nature with all the islands will keep some of it. At that point in time, what you might probably see, at least on a seasonal basis, is ships crossing, instead of these routes along the coastlines, the northeast route across Russia, northwest passage through Canada, you'll see the trans-Arctic shipping route, which is come out of the Bering Sea and all the way across somewhere between Greenland and Iceland. And that will be our reality at that point in time.
How is that going to change the rest of the world? Like, what will summers at the Jersey Shore look like?
I have no bloody clue. I'm expecting they'll probably be warmer than now. I mean, I made this comment to someone I don't remember if it was your class or a different class. I think it was a different class over the summer. The planet has seen warm times in the past, much warmer than even we're technically looking at right now. The Paleoeocene thermal maximum, PETM, showed an 8-degree increase over the prior temperature scheme. And that was seen as an incredibly high temperature. And it resulted also, as far as we can tell, with increasing CO2 output. The thing is, it took 20,000 years to get there. So in those 20,000 years, because it took that much time, yes, some creatures were lost. Yes, some survived and adapted, and some moved farther north where they could find a more favorable climate, and others found new niches to exploit. We're doing things so fast right now, I don't know if that's even really possible. And I have no idea what's going to make it and what's not going to make it. Some species are incredibly adaptable. Other ones are really, really, really not. And the world we see in 20 years may be wildly different than the one we see now in many, many ways. I can't even give a moral value to it because I can't really say one way or another, but it's going to be a different world. It's going to be a world with potentially hotter summers, but even now, warm with occasionally really cold and snowy periods during winter. You might be able to perennially grow peppers in your yard.
Is there anything like, do you think individual efforts are even important right now, or is this just like smoke them if you got them time?
No, I think individual efforts are always important. Individual efforts are always a good idea. Individual coordinated efforts towards a common goal are better. So yeah, that I recycle and compost, good things. That you don't, so be it. I'm not actually making this presumption upon you. I'm just using you as an example.
That's okay.
That's sort of whatever. But if we're both doing things to minimize our electrical consumption, to convert our personal consumption, like not use fossil fuels to heat our houses, something I have to look forward to right now because we use oil. Maybe helping encourage local city government to put in or change laws or put in permitting things to make sure everyone who has a parking space in front of their house always has that parking space so they can park their car and get it charged, because not a lot of us have garages. Things like that. Doing these sort of common actions are always a good thing.
How guilty should somebody feel about eating steaks?
Not really. I don't like associating guilt with this. The social controls are great as a way to sort of encourage common use and common action. But it's like, am I going to blast anyone for just eating beef? No, I'm not going to blast anyone for eating beef. I hope they're making the best choices, though. And I know those aren't financially possible for everyone. But is your beef grass-fed and not grain finished? Is your beef local versus far away? Is your beef in any ways just better than the stuff that you can buy in like a frozen 20 pack out of the grocer's freezer of like hamburgers? Yes, Maura, I understand.
Every time the animals come up there your cat is.
Okay, fine, you're gonna be done there. Yeah, so I'm not gonna slag anyone for eating beef. It's
okay, good.
But if you're gonna do it the best you can. How about that?
And that kind of goes across the board, like,
yeah, do the best you can, but be sincere in doing it. Do what you can. Make sure that you're always thinking about this stuff. Make sure you're always working towards it. Make sure that even if maybe you don't get behind certain things that are, for whatever reasons, unpalatable to you, that you recognize there is good to happen and good to be done and focus on that. One of the interesting things is the sheer number of local scale environmentalists who are otherwise politically conservative. And it's always interesting to talk to these people because, well, first of all, they're really good allies to have for these local scale environmental issues. Protecting streams because of fishing issues. I mean, Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited, they're both hunting fishing organizations, but they're really decent environmental advocacy groups in their own right, because if you can't have these environments, you can't hunt for ducks or fish for trout. So bueno to them, my hat off to them. I don't know about them in specific, but a lot of these guys basically are like really narrowly locally focused, which is great. But then you start talking about the bigger issues and you sort of lose them because their politics come into play. And it'd be lovely to sort of say, to get across the fact that, yes, and maybe your local issue is related to this bigger issue. Maybe your local issue here is seeing impacts from events and effects elsewhere. Wouldn't it be great to address the larger issue to help the smaller issue?
Yeah, I guess the problem is just like an inability to empathize with a situation that's not directly in front of you.
It can be a problem. I mean, it really, really can. I have neighbors who no idea actually what their politics are, but who are very proudly Lehigh Valley residents and are like, I have lived in Easton my entire life and I've almost never gone anywhere else. And I'm like, that's fascinating. I have never met a person like that before in my entire life. And it's really interesting talking to these people because they're really like so dedicated to where they are and the world that's right there, that things beyond that really don't resonate with them or even like ping upon their awareness until it's right there in front of them. I remember when I mentioned something, dropped along the lines of my family's Jewish, to my neighbor, who's a really great neighbor to have. And he's just like, wait, you're Jewish? What does that mean? And we had an interesting little conversation about this because he's never met a person who has at least admitted they were Jewish in front of him. And it's fascinating because there's a lot of people in the world who really have a lot of conceptions that, because they haven't experienced what else is going on.
That's interesting. So these neighbors of yours, they never really left the city, but as Easton becomes more diverse and more cultures are living in the city, the world is kind of coming to them. And,
in some ways, yeah.
And I guess it's up to them if they want to sort of override any conceptions they had before about people and cultures in the world. But the problem is when you have like politicians spreading divide and sowing divide and then the media jumping in on it, it makes that enlightenment process more difficult or impossible for a lot of people.
I don't disagree. It's really fascinating talking to other people I've known along these lines where it's just like, well, this is what I'm told, and well, why shouldn't I believe it? And how do you really answer that in any way that basically does not cast shade on what they hold near and dear? How do you navigate that gently and compassionately? Because unfortunately, I think compassion is really the issue in play here. A lot more is needed to move people from strongly held positions, and it's hard. It's so hard because you don't want to. You want to just nail them to the metaphorical, or maybe hopefully not literal, wall and get them to somehow change that way. And that might work for some people. For a lot of people, it makes them just dig in their heels and go, no. A lot like my 5-year-old.
Well, you were really talented at kind of standing between me and other students who sort of didn't see eye to eye on a number of issues. But I think it is one of the biggest problems we're facing right now. And the strange thing is, like, these people like QAnon types, climate change deniers, I just don't get the selection process in what they believe and what they refuse to believe. It's like, well, why do you trust this guy and not them? Like, or for example, someone who is resistant to getting the COVID-19 vaccination because they think it'll have some terrible side effects. But it's like, but you're not worried about the terrible side effects of getting COVID-19. Like when I just read yesterday, a 26-year-old UFC fighter on his way to a world championship was forced to retire because his lungs never healed after having COVID-19. And after every time he exercised, he'd be coughing up blood. Ugh. And I'm like, well, that sounds like the type of side effect you're worried about experiencing from taking the vaccine, yet you trust these groups on Reddit and whatever, Parler probably now, saying like, oh, you're going to die if you take the vaccine. But like, why don't you believe a doctor when he tells you you're going to die if you get COVID-19 or could possibly, you know, you're not. Same thing with climate change. Like they'll deny climate change and deny the evidence, but then they'll believe a much less credible argument against it. I don't get it. Do you have any thoughts on that? And as being a smart guy, like in a a professor, is it difficult dealing with dummies?
Okay, let me break this down. Because there's a lot of things going on here. I'll put that one to the wayside right now.
All
but
right.
to your first question, you actually touched on this yourself. It's experience. It's your world is this, and then suddenly your world, things from beyond your ken, beyond your knowledge, start happening to you, and that can be weird and strange. One of the things I've noticed is something that a lot of people put credibility into, and I'm not going to say any one group, but just humans in general, is we find a trusted figure who says things in a way we like. And when you get that, if that person tells you there's a microchip in your COVID-19 vaccine and your chances because of getting the disease are either minimal to none or the disease doesn't exist, why not go that way? Why not believe that person, especially when everyone else is? And that gets right into the charismatic speaker and social pressure amongst your selected set of peers. There's a lot of that going on. And I won't say it's only limited to one group. It really shows its head in a lot of ways. That's just simply, these are the directions we tend to find most problematic right now. Though roll the clock back, about 10 years ago, and the anti-vaccinators were mostly liberal and tended to be verily the thoughtless fringes of that as well. So Jenny McCarthy and all that jazz. So it's changed over time. I'm not sure exactly why, but to then deal with this in my classroom, though, is once again to be understanding, to be patient, to be just accepting and maybe asking some good questions, as well as just simply saying at points in time, this is not the forum for this. We're going to not talk about this right now or at all. I've gotten a lot of that in my class in one form or another. And it's interesting because sometimes it can get very hostile. Never particularly hostile, but just sort of hostile in general, not to me directly, but in general. So one of the more interesting times I had was actually my first semester teaching. And I had one of my best students come up to me before class.
When was this? For reference?
2019. So spring of 2019. And this young woman who was one of my best students in class, really good, came up to me, and because we were talking about archaeological evidence the class prior for human inhabitation of the New World, so North and South America. And the number, how it's changed over time, because when I was a kid, it was about 7,000 years ago. When I was in my undergrad, it was about 11 to 12,000 years ago. Now we've now pushed it solidly to 14 to 16,000 years ago with some really good evidence of 25. And then we have stuff for 50 and maybe older. We're not entirely sure. A lot of argument over this. And she's like, okay, so I'm a young Earth creationist. I'm like, okay. No comment other than, okay.
That means she thought that the world was created like 2,000 years ago or something?
6,000, based on what is calculated off the Bible. And I agree.
That's perfect.
And she asked me, so how do they figure out this stuff? How do they figure out the dating for artifacts going back this far? Because those would push it well out of that extent.
6,001, 6,002.
Right. And that's the thing, is like, I don't shame them for their beliefs. Frankly, and I will say in all honesty, the fact that she was one of my best students probably biased me to be as gentle as possible and kind as possible.
What an experience.
And she was rock solid. So I basically said, look, here's how we go about figuring these things out. There's these many ways to date it based on radioactive elements. Carbon-14 is the most known example, but there are other radioactive elements we can use. We can use geological stratigraphy, the layering of the rock layers, to figure things out. We can look at the various and sundry evidence around them to sort of identify them within context of the environment at the time when they were down. Is it happened to be next to a midden heap full of woolly mammoth bones? Okay, well, woolly mammoths died out in North America around 10,000 years ago. We could say it's somewhere before that point in time. So there's a lot of different things. And I explain all this. And to her credit, she didn't say, you're horrible or you're trying to deceive me or anything like that. She's just like, thank you very much for explaining that to me. And we sat down and started class.
And so was she willing to like open her mind to that idea, or was she just kind of like being polite?
Well, it was not required on her part. This was before our class, the class after we talked about that stuff.
Okay.
So it was, as far as I can tell, a seeking for information.
Wow.
And I have no idea what happened from it. I have not talked to her since. She still got one of the best grades in my class. She was a solid student. It was a pleasure to have her in class because she was engaged and wonderful. And I have no idea what fell out of this. We just had this one conversation with that framing around it. And all I could do is just sit down and explain things. Or actually stand there and explain things. But yeah, that's all I can do is just stand there and explain things. Because, well, first of all, I think you might be familiar with the trope of the quote atheist professor being taken down by the religious student. Kevin Sorbo did a movie on this. I didn't realize Kevin Sorbo was that kind of person. About 3 or 4 years ago. And this is something that if you find yourself wandering the edges of the internet, you start to find this idea running around. And it's fascinating and it's bizarre. And I'm sure it's based on some interaction someone had somewhere. And there might be a kernel of truth to it, but I really don't think it's that frequent. And I don't believe it happens all the time. I'm sure someone's going to go to your program after you post it and go, my cousin in Albuquerque, New Mexico had this happen 3 years ago. And it's like, okay, great. You found one other. Mazel tov. Yeah. That's another data point in favor for the miles and miles of people who are just like, we don't want to, because we're literally not paid enough to do this. It is not our business. All we can do is try to educate, because that's all we can do. And I am sad to say that stupid comes in every color. And all we can try to do is try to approach the person as even-handedly and explain things as many times as possible.
Takes an incredible amount of patience that I don't know that I have, but I'm glad that you and people like you do, because what you're saying is interesting. Like, it all comes down to a lack of compassion. But in order to have a conversation like that, you have to have compassion for the person who doesn't necessarily have compassion.
Yes, you know? That's the hardest part of all.
Because from my vantage, someone who believes that the world is 6,000 years old, that's antisocial behavior. Like, that's anti-science. Like, we have the internet. You clearly know that you at least know that there are other theories, if you want to call them that, even, proven science. So to me, that's sort of, in a way, it's violence, because it leads to things like what we see now is people sending death threats to Dr. Fauci and denying the pandemic and 500,000 deaths because, quote, you had 15 cases and soon 15 cases will be down to 0, or whatever he said exactly.
Right.
So in my mind, that's violence. It's warfare, anti-intellectualism. But since America, freedom of speech, like, you're just being a patriot. You're just being an American by having these ideas and not being, afraid to express your thoughts. But maybe we, shouldn't as much. Like, if it's not your area of expertise, like, let the experts talk and trust them, and not come up with what is that spark in your mind?
Well, a couple things.
Okay.
So firstly, the expert side is an interesting one. That gets back to the trusted individual that you get your stuff from, which it might be Cousin Joe, it might be someone you only know online. So the Federalist paper, noted conservative magazine, actually, not a newspaper, Possibly like was for the longest time the bastion of the intellectual right in the US. Put in an article back in, I want to say, when was that? That was that 2011? 2014. I just pulled it up because I keep it bookmarked for a very good reason. It's called The Death of Expertise. It's fascinating because it's one of those things where it was written kind of as a condemnation of anti-intellectualism amongst liberals of the time, which is, of course, 10 years ago now. And with a very strong aim, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly from the last time I read it, at the anti-vaxxer movement, which at that time was very embedded in the left. But it was also at the same time a more broad statement of how people don't trust experts, because you can get that person who just tells you what you want to hear and says it really, really well. And as long as you have that person, that's your expert. Even if you nominate them to that position yourself in your head, that's your expert. Or maybe you just think you're the expert because you can read and you can read whatever you think is necessary to become the expert in that thing. So the first incarnation is when I first ran into this in around 2014. I don't even remember how I found it. There was a comment section. A lot of these places have dumped comment sections since then. Yeah. And this is a paper aimed at conservatives, or a journal aimed at conservatives. And the sheer number of people in the comments who basically said, how dare you? How dare you say that I don't know as much as you? How dare you say that I am not as well, I don't understand a topic as well as someone who has a degree in this. And it was fascinating because it's basically the group feeding upon itself. And it was really, really interesting because I find a reason to pull it out every so often. And I find it resonates very strongly with the elements of the American conservative segment who rejected Trumpism and all that sort of stuff. To them, this is something they find very appealing and it has a great deal of meaning to them because they see this amongst themselves, even though in many ways they're kind of the thin sliver on the side, so to speak. So it's a very interesting thing to look at. And I forgot what else I was going to say, but I feel that's still valid.
Yeah, you were just kind of responding to my point of trusting experts rather than believing that you are the expert or that you're the one who appoints the experts, But you're right. I mean, that is the problem with that. Like, their expert might be somebody on YouTube with a big like pyramid and eye behind them in the background,
or PragerU.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I learned growing up, like playing in punk bands and skateboarding. It's just in my nature, like to watch and observe what the older guys in the bands were doing and sort of follow their lead. Like, oh, they booked a tour and they went on this route. Like, yeah, I think I can do it. Or watching the guys at the skate park, like, oh, he did it like this. And I just learned, to like kind of shut up, ask questions if you're going to talk, and follow the lead of the people who seem to be doing good. But, it's like, I don't know what causes a person to, like, it's in your own best interest to do that. You're going to avoid sounding like a fool. You're going to learn something and be better for it. I don't know why you wouldn't live that way.
I think that you're making a good connotation because I think I have a good example also with that. My background's in the entertainment industry. So
in what medium?
Mainly theater, dance, and corporate events, but I did a little music and a little film and television.
Acting?
No, technical. I was a lighting guy.
Oh, cool.
And like deckhand stage manager. I ran follow spots for more than a few musical acts. But yeah, and that's the same thing. But you know what the situation in all these situations is? That older guy you're watching, he's there. You're talking to him, maybe. Maybe you've gotten up the gumption to go talk to him. Maybe you've asked your buddy who knows everyone around here a little bit better, like, who is that? What's their thing? That's still having that personal connection is really strong. I mean, this gets into the whole idea of like reputation.
You build trust.
Yeah. And in those contexts, like you'll find these guys are like these people who otherwise go down these paths that are very strange and different and potentially hostile and violent, still have those connections. Maybe they're building those connections in their groups. Maybe they have those connections at work. They all work in a machine shop. And yeah, there's old Joe in the corner. Old Joe knows his stuff. Old Joe's been doing this for 50 years. He knows every trick in the book. He knows how every one of these machines work. Listen to him. He'll tell you what you need to do. But he's there.
Yeah.
So it's really is one of those things where to make that abstracted step to then say, at the very least, Neil deGrasse Tyson is a person to listen to, or you can sit there and dissect an argument that's being presented to you. So you can say, this person has these benefits, or this person is full of it and there's really no point in listening. Or, this is all hogwash, but make a really good point right there. And that's about it.
Yeah. And I think with social media too, it's just so easy to be like very mean to celebrities and like, somebody like Dr. Fauci right now, he's a celebrity, he's in the spotlight. And, even like myself with my small following from bands that I played in, like if I post something political, the way that some people respond to me so viciously, I'm just like, how could you talk to me like that? So you look at it on a grander scale, and I mean, people are sending like literal death threats to these people, like I mentioned, or somebody like AOC, pushing, agendas like the Green New Deal and stuff that they see as being whatever, some violation of their rights somehow in their minds, when in reality it really, is serving the proletariat and the working class and not the elite, which they in most part don't belong to.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of that. It's aspirational, though. It's always been aspirational. You could be that if you just work hard, save your money, maybe take these risky bets. It'll all pay off, and you'll join that group.
Yeah, right. We've been all over the place from the Arctic and back here, just like in your classes. What would you say then to wrap this up? Like, what is the common thread in your mind, and what would be a good concluding statement here or idea? Where is your mind at right now? Like, what needs to be happening? What are we observing? Where do you see this?
I see what you're saying. For better or for worse, we've got to trust people. Because you can't get rid of a whole swath of everyone who doesn't agree with you and say either eliminate them psychologically in the sense that you just consider them not relevant and somehow you have to work around them. Might have to happen, but it's best to not write them off automatically. And you definitely should undertake anything that actually gets rid of them physically. So really the only thing you're left with is you have to deal with these folks. And it's one of those things that's hard because it isn't easy. But it's hard. And if you can make it work so that at least at the end of the day, we're all able to get along, I consider that a victory. And it may not sound like a resounding conversion of everyone to the same set of ideals, because you're never, ever going to have that happen. Because we're naturally fractious. But we can at least be decent, and we can set good examples by doing such and stepping up when it's absolutely necessary to actually say, no, this can't happen anymore. So not just simply rolling over every time something happens, says, oh, I'll be nice to you. It's about being strong and kind.
Yeah, and there is a lot of kindness and strength and kindness in my martial arts classes. Those are the two rules I have for my students. Well, the first two, I have three. The third one is never stop practicing Shaolin Kung Fu. Keep paying that tuition, But the first two are be kind and be brave. And I explain to them, like, to be kind, you have to be brave sometimes. You have to, like, be able to stand up for people, you sometimes have to step out of the crowd and step out of maybe what your friends are doing and what people are going along with. And to be brave, you got to be kind, because you have to be kind to yourself and kind to others to know that it is time to step up, sort of like encapsulating what you said with the teachings of Shaolin Kung Fu. That's really cool. It's been great talking to you. I mean, I'm not quite on the intellectual level by any stretch to really, take this conversation to places as, interesting as it maybe could have gone. But, I would love to learn more about all this, and maybe one day we could go to the Arctic together and check out the North Pole.
That sounds awesome.
See if Santa Claus really exists.
Well, NORAD tracks them every year, so
All right. Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Professor Schwartz. And you know what? Before we close it out, is there anything you want to add? Anything you want to shout out or call attention to?
Oh, man. You know what? All I'll say is this. At this point in time, with all of us bound at home, the reason why you and I are not doing this in the same room together, or bound and limited in so many ways, be ready to just do your best, to reach out, to be helpful as best as you can. But at the same time, it might be time to also look beyond what you consider your world and start to consider the world beyond.
That's it. End it right there. All right. I'm feeling shades of Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I know, seriously.
It's inspiring stuff. All right. All right, Professor Schwartz. Well, it's been great talking with you. And have a good rest of your day. I hope to talk to you soon.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you very much.